Typhoon brought these two together. You're listening to the Bearded Theologians Beardcast, hosted by Zach Bechtold and Matt Franks. If you'd like to find out more about these Bearded Theologians, you can go online at beardedtheologians.com. You're listening to the Bearded Theologians podcast. I'm Matt Franks.
I'm Zach Bechtold.
And this week, we're going to talk about prophets. And as we unpack this conversation, Zach and I were having our little thing, and we recognize that in this conversation, this could be one of those conversations that could go on for days and hours. And so this is going to be something that we just want to continue the conversation on our social media and website to continue to have healthy dialogue to flesh out when we hear the word prophet, because I know that sometimes when we hear the word prophet, we can shudder or we can squeam, or we just don't like the word whatsoever. And so we understand that. And so we'll just continue the conversation healthily. And we'll probably address this some other time in another Beardcast later on down the road, but we're glad that you're listening to us today. And so Zach, as we talk about the word prophet, what kind of stirs up within you?
You know, prophet's a tough word. For me, it's a tough concept to think about, modern day prophets. I always think about, our major and minor prophets in the Bible. You think about Jesus, you think about the apostles and those guys who went out and brought this word from God to people. And I struggle with that concept sometimes of modern day prophet, just in the simple fact of, it's old, not old, but it's just something that I don't know how to articulate it. That's why this is going to be an ongoing conversation. I think the way that I was taught growing up and doing things early in the church and early in my spiritual formation, the concept of modern day prophet really wasn't there. It was all, it's these old guys in the Bible and things like that. And so the more that I come in depth on my relationship and my spirituality, the more I see modern day prophets around us through various people. And so for me, that word prophet evokes just this sense of importance, that somebody has a message that we need to hear, or we ourselves have a message that we're called to give. And I struggle with that, and the importance and the opportunity that comes with that.
And that's kind of where I lie. I have that's one of my words where my ears pick up and I get a little bit, okay, so where's this person going? Are they going to be extremely crazy, or, are they going to talk about biblical prophecy that some people do that talk about the end of the world? And I have a hard time with that. That is something I do not swallow very easily. It is something that stirs up an anxiety within me, that when people talk about so-and-so being a prophet, I really question whether that is true, because it's one of those words that I just have a hard time really wrestling with, in a sense of giving a firm definition of what a prophet looks like. And then somewhere, and I don't remember where, and I've been looking and listening and trying to figure out where it may have come from, but I heard somewhere that prophet is someone who speaks truth to power, and that may have come from Sarah Held Evans and her stuff that she does, but and that's kind of where I feel like it's resonating with me from. But the more I think about that a prophet speaks truth to power, and then I apply that to the biblical narrative that is available to us, it's amazing to see how that actually works out, and how that can kind of give some guidance in that. And so when I ask, when I say, do we see prophets today? The question is, who is speaking truth to power, whether it's political power, religious power, or any kind of power, who's trying to bring forth light in the midst of darkness, of whatever that may be. And so, as we continue to wrestle with this word, there's tons of resources out there that you can look for, and to kind of develop an understanding of prophets. And as I was working through those this week, I kind of really discovered that whole idea of someone who speaks truth to power kind of really works really well.
I have a question. do we struggle with this concept of prophet because we see prophets of people who are speaking truth that we like to hear, um, or we struggle with it because our experience has been, people are calling and labeling people prophets and we don't like what they have to say. Um, are we willing to accept that prophets are going to bring a word that maybe we don't want to hear, maybe a truth that we don't want to see? Or are we willing to call prophets prophets because we like what they have to say, that we agree with them?
I think that's a good question, and I think the more we wrestle with that, that's where, and you and I were talking about this beforehand. Maybe it's where they have to die, and we have time to really reflect upon what they're saying, and it takes time to reflect upon it. And we can't make a rash decision on a prophet and what they're saying. But I think we soak it in and ask the question: is this speaking truth to power in a way that pushes us?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's pushing us to act on the injustice, or maybe it's causing us to really think about what they're saying. If someone calls themselves a prophet and they say that they need, $1 million to buy a jet to go spread the gospel, I'm a little bit more cautious of that versus someone who's saying, you know, um, one in four people, children, go home hungry every night in the state of Oklahoma. That is unacceptable. That is unchristian. And how dare we call ourselves Christian if we allow that to continue to happen? That's the fine line between being a prophet. And I think that that's the reality that we have to wrestle with as we think about this word: is how does it stretch us, but then how is it actually speaking actual truth and not just something that's frivolous as saying, hey, give me $1 million so I can buy a jet so I can go spread the gospel. And I'm not really going to go spread the gospel. I'm just going to go fly around in my nice $1 million jet.
Right. There's a sense of humility that comes along with that responsibility, whether you consider a prophet or pastor or just an all-around person. I think that comes into play. Something I think about. We talked beforehand. You've been going through Jeremiah. We've been running through a sermon series here on Jonah, and this week we get into Jonah actually gets to Nineveh, and his call there isn't to go and evangelize. His call there is to go and tell them what's going to happen, and what's going to happen is not good. That in 40 days God's going to overthrow Nineveh, this great city. And I think something that clicked for me this week that maybe hasn't in the past, or maybe it has and I just forgot, was Nineveh's an Assyrian place, and so they're not Hebrew, they're not the Israelites, they're not God's chosen people, and yet Jonah's called to go there. They don't like each other, they're not going to like each other, but he's called to go and warn them of what happens. And he gets on the outskirts of town, and he's going through these suburb type areas, and he just finally looks around headed towards the city center and says, you know what, I'm just going to start telling these people what's going on. I'm going to start here. And the people hear what he's saying and hear his message, which wasn't a popular one. If somebody came into your town and was like, hey, time's coming, it's not going to be good for you guys, and they hear that and they go, well, we got to change. And they immediately change. They have this huge change of heart, in that movement grows, and before Jonah can get to the city center and get to the king and begin to tell him what's going on, the word reaches him first through this kind of this grassroots movement of a message that wasn't popular, a message that wasn't going to be good, and a message that Jonah frankly didn't want to take to these people. But yet he speaks truth and they hear him, even though it's unpopular, and they change. They move forward with it and it spreads. Therefore, Jonah being that prophet, being that person who brings truth. And I think what struck me most interesting about it is we have this Old Testament example of God's grace for all people, because God changes his mind. He doesn't destroy Nineveh. He sees that they've repented and turned from their ways, and they get to continue on with that. And so I think that was the big thing for me is Jonah brings this message to the Gentile people, and we don't see that very much in the Old Testament. It's always towards God's chosen. It's always towards the Israelites, and yet we see a prophet bring it to all people early on.
And that's the deal with with me with resonating with Jeremiah is that I really see a lot of truth what Jeremiah is saying to the Israelites as they're getting ready to be shipped off from the exile. And as I read closely to Jeremiah, I really discovered that there's a sense of truth in us today. Is that some of our problems are caused because we have fallen away from God, and we have made the decision to put money and power in front of our lives versus actually looking at God and recognizing how God is at work and how God leads us and calls us to do God's work here on earth. And while Jeremiah is known as a whiny prophet, you'd be a whiny prophet too if you were like 13 years old asking to go speak to these nations when you're asking to speak truth to power, and they're not listening to you because, well, they're so caught up on themselves that they just don't care. And while he does get the title of being the whiny prophet, I kind of see some truth in that sometimes, that how often are we missing out when injustices are crying out to us and we just turn our back on it?
Well, sure. We do that all the time. We hear these movements, we see these things through social media and stuff like that. We see that Louisiana is underwater and California is on fire, and we share those posts and we pray for them. But what do we do beyond that? Do we let it, as our Facebook timeline just shifts down, do we let our thoughts and our action shift down with it and move on to the next thing? That's it's a cultural thing, I think. We hear these things, we see these injustices, we get mad about it for about 20 seconds, and we move on to the next thing. Our follow through on these injustices, on children going home hungry, they become commonplace, and so we move on. Maybe we try to help for a brief season, and maybe we just don't. We just move on from it. One of my favorite examples of that is, Coney. What was it, Coney 2012?
Yeah.
That big huge movement through young people and young adults and on college campuses and stuff like that. And then just a few weeks later, it was gone. Nobody said anything else about it, but everybody was so fired up about it, and then did nothing.
Well, it's the same thing. I mean, it's funny because as I've been looking through my Facebook timeline, the go back in time, I've been seeing all the stuff on the ALS challenge and seeing, that did make a small impact, but how people really addressing those issues? Are we finding ways to make those people that are dealing with ALS a lot better, or we just give money and then expect other people to manage it? And I think that's where we have fallen into the trap of helping, is that, oh, we'll give our money to this cause and we won't engage into it. And a prophet would say, no, you need to go get dirty. You need to invest yourself into this. And I think that's why we do have prophets today that are speaking truth and trying to help us engage in those things that are truly important, things that we truly need to attack. And some of them stretch us. Some of us call us to let go of our power and allow the other to come and be with us. And that stretches people. When you're asking people to give up power, they really don't. And I think that's where the prophet comes in and says, no, you need to, because this is not right. What you are doing is not right. And I think that a prophet tries to correct the course of a faith and tries to steer it in the direction that God is calling them to. And we see that over and over with Jeremiah, is that, yeah, you're going through this time now and things are going to suck. But after all this is over, we hope that you really turn your focus upon God. And when you do that, it will be all right. And I think that's the whole thing with prophets. And like I said, we can continue this conversation on and on and on. We could go in the circles. And so what I want to encourage us to do today is how does that stir up within you? What does that call you to think about? How does that challenge you to think about how prophets work in today's world? Because they are at work in today's world, and some of them we know who they are, and some of them we don't know because either we're lost in something or we just aren't paying that close attention. And so I want to encourage you to continue that conversation going. Don't be afraid of that word prophet. Let it stir within you what God is calling you to pay attention to, and see who are prophets in your life, who are speaking truth to your life and challenging you to be a better person. And I think when you start acknowledging even those little minor prophets in your life, you'll start to see how the big ones are at work in the world today. And Zach, do you have anything else to share?
No, I mean, you nailed it right there. Just continue to have the conversation, continue to let that stir up, and begin to identify and think of who in your life, whether you liked the message or not, has been prophetic. And how does that stir the emotion, and how does that stir you to create change and be a part of something bigger, and be proactive.
And so, as we bring this podcast to a close, a few things. We want to encourage you to continue to support us with going to our website and looking at some of the stuff that we have on Zazzle. It's actually, there's a lot of cool stuff. I mean, if I had the money, I would buy up a lot of stuff.
There is not $1 million jet on our website.
No, but you could buy $1 million worth of coffee mugs if you really wanted.
Okay. That would be okay.
But one of the things that we're going to have to shift, and we recognize this and we're working on this, is that we'll be transitioning the video cast into some way, shape, or form. We don't know yet. Google Hangouts is going away September 12th. So we have a couple of weeks to kind of figure all this out. And while we're angry and upset at Google for making a change, sometimes change is necessary to help us grow and to help us move into a better direction. And so Zach and I are figuring this out. And so as we continue to figure that out, pray for us that we're continuing to do at least the video portion too. We've got a way how we're going to handle the audio, but we'd love to continue the video because that's something that I know both of us enjoy putting on. And
we know you like to see our faces.
And so we just want to encourage you to keep the conversations going and check us out on periodtheologians.com, our Facebook, our Twitter, our Instagram, our Zazzle, and anywhere else that we try to figure out how we can place ourselves out there to continue conversations of healthy theological dialogue. And so for the Bearded Theologians, I'm Matt Franks.
I'm Zach Bechtold.
And we will see you sometime.